the Countryside Podcasts with Chris Skinner.
Good evening, everybody. This is a special recording this evening. Matthew will be here with me tomorrow morning, but it's about 7:45 in the evening. There's still quite a lot of light, and I'm just driving down through the farm on some of the farm tracks to the largest area of woodland here at Hives Farm, which is called Fox's Grove. And just driving into the woodland now on one of the old shooting rides. There's just 3 of us here this evening. Myself, Chris Skinner, Rat, my terrible terrier, who's sitting on my lap, and the third guest, as it's such an unusual recording, this one's just for you. So I'm just going to imagine that you're sitting right beside me in the truck, and we turn the truck off, handbrake on, out of the truck, and we got a little bit of a walk to start with. And this area of woodland is really special. Right, out we go, because we have 4 or 5 species of bat which are here at the farm. Pipistrelles, which there are 3 species being really common. One of the bats with the largest wingspan, just over 12 inches, 14 inches even, and that's the noctule. And we've got a noctule roost not far from where I'm standing. Sun's just setting at the moment. And then we have another species of bat which is quite often seen, like pipistrelles, in built-up areas, urban areas, and that's the serotine. So we're spoilt for choice. Long-eared bats come out just after dusk. Pipistrelles and serotines around about dusk as the sun's setting, and sometimes the noctules, which are in a hollow tree not far from where I'm walking up to, come out just before dusk, just at sunset, just as the sun's disappearing. And it's a really good time of year to come and see them, because there's still quite a bit of light. The trees have still got a lot of leaves on them, hardly any leaves on the woodland floor yet. So what I'll do, I'll find an open piece of canopy, and I sit down. Sometimes I lay down, put my hands behind my head, but I'm holding the microphone, and you're going to be sitting beside me. That might look a bit funny. So open canopy's a good place to see, particularly the pipistrelles and the serotines flying over our heads, almost at head height. Noctules are rather different. When they leave their roost, they fly off out of the tree, which is where their maternal roost is, and they go in a dead straight line, very fast flying, quite high up above the tops of the trees, and they head down into the river valley, which runs on the west side of Hives Farm. That's the River Tass, and they'll follow that down and feed on insects and other sort of any prey that they can catch. So it's really quiet in the woodland at the moment. In about 10 or 15 minutes, the jackdaws, carrion crows, and some rooks join them in quite a big roost, about 200 yards away from where I am. So I'm just going to make my way down a really steep bank. They're old river cliffs. Rat's ahead of me. He's being very good. He's quite excited about this arrangement. And we're heading down now. I've got to be quite careful because it's about a 45-degree angle and the height of about 30 metres. So I'm now going downhill, and we'll just see if we can get some sounds of the jackdaws and the other corvids that come to roost here. Eventually the roost will disperse and head off to Buckingham Fen on the east side of Norwich, and that's one of the largest roosts in Europe for corvids. They're just coming down to the bottom of the hill now. The soil's changed from gravelly soil to quite peaty here, so it's lovely and quiet underfoot. Right, I'm just going to turn the microphone off for a minute or two and just make our way for the rest of our little trek to see if we can hear the corvids coming into roost, and then I'll go back to the top of the hill where there's some large old oak trees and some beech trees that have fallen down in recent gales, and there's a lovely big open patch of sky. You'll be sitting beside me, and I just heard the first jackdaws and rooks coming in to roost over the top of me. Give you an idea, probably between 1,000 and 1,500 use this area to roost in. And why is it special for bats? Because the woodland is full of old trees. The old trees are peppered with woodpecker holes. That's where, at this time of the year, before they hibernate, the bats spend our daytime. Remember, this coming Tuesday, it's the proper autumn equinox, where if you stood on the equator at midday, you wouldn't have a shadow. It's bang overhead, and every day after that, the southern hemisphere has a little bit more daylight than the northern hemisphere. So the autumn equinox, exactly equal daylight and night time. And after that, we start descending into autumn proper. I'm now at the lower part of the wood, and I can just hear perhaps 20, 30 jackdaws and rooks coming in, circling over the top of the trees way up above me. So just listen to that for a second, wait for them to come into roost, and then I'll head off back up the hill with you, and we'll sit down and see if we can enjoy some bats in the nicest possible way. We're not going to eat them. It's just about dusk now. The Norwich to Liverpool Street in London train has just gone past, leaves Thorpe railway station at 8 o'clock, and it's now about 10 past 8. The roost is quiet now. The jackdaws, rooks and crows all sleep in slightly different areas. Whether they don't like each other's company or not, I don't know. And I made my way back through the woodland on these lovely old shooting ride tracks that are still lovely and clear. And as I went past some thick vegetation, the smell of a fox was almost overwhelming. It was probably a dog fox just come out for his evening's work, and he'd scent marked the side of the track, and it was really, really strong. We've had some rain, a shower earlier today, and a little bit further on I caught the scent of what can only be the mushrooms, the toadstools growing on the tree stumps that are all around the woodland here. And all three of us, that's Rat, myself and you, are just making our way up this steep bank again to the top of the hill where the canopy is open from the loss of some beech and some oak trees here on the side of this hill. Oh, nearly fell over. It's pretty steep. We're nearly up there. We're just 2/3 of the way up. Lots of puffing and panting. And the first stars are just visible. It's a lovely, clear night, not a breath of air. So there'll be lots of flying insects. And I know just where I'm getting to. Lots of bracken here on the side of the track. And under the bracken just here. It's a bit damp, but I hope you don't mind. I'm going to ask you to sit down beside me on this log, and above us it's clear sky, just dotted with one or two stars. I thought we got a bat straight away, and it was a late arrival to the corvid roost. That was probably a carrion crow. They tend to come in last of all. The magpies were already there, and I did disturb one earlier when I'd got the microphone turned off, and it sounded rather like a machine gun going off. It spotted rat rather than me. I've got dark clothes on tonight. But I do apologise. I've got a wet bottom already, and you probably have as well. So we're just going to sit and wait and watch and just let the fantastic kind of tranquility of the woodland at this time of night, that sort of halfway phase between daylight that's full of activity and human noise as well, and the night time when it goes quiet and somehow the trees are in silhouette. Some broken off oak trees about 15 yards from me, and a huge beech tree which is also snapped off about 10 feet up. This side hill really catches the wind, and so it's given opportunity for the next generation of trees to flourish. They've got headroom now, if you like. So I'm just watching the whole time. The sky's just beginning to darken, but there's plenty of light. Norwich is about 2 miles to the north of where I'm sitting. Street lights are now coming on, and that gives it a kind of back glow as well, which helps to see these beautiful little flying mammals. A few jackdaws still complaining down there. Just when it goes dark like this, it's as though somebody has turned a light switch off and it goes completely quiet. They've finished all their, what I call pillow talk. A big, probably a 787 going across the top of me. Looks like it's coming from the States, flying from west to east, and will probably go across to Frankfurt. I can just see the lights on the wings. It's up there, 10,000 metres up. Can just about hear it. And I caught a glimpse just then of, I think it was a pipistrelle, quite high up in amongst the tree canopy. And what I'm hoping for is to have one almost brush my hair, because I'm on top of the hill, and they'll fly up through the trees just looking for insects, anything that's flying. There'll be lots of moths in there as well, which will be really good for the serotines, which are slightly larger bat. Pips are quite small, about an 8-inch wingspan, and it's a really important time for all the species of bats which hibernate, sort of pipistrelles November time, serotines a little bit earlier, and it varies a lot with the noctules, those bats with a large wingspan, which are in the woodpecker hole, not far from where I'm sitting, but they'll all have come out by now, because it's got darker quicker than I thought. Why it's an important time of year? Because once you get into the winter months, particularly late October into November, there won't be flying insects about. The swallows and house martins and swifts head off to Africa, so they're flying, they're very mobile, but it's doubtful whether bats could actually survive our winters, although we've had some mild winters recently. The same applies to hedgehogs. I mean, if you feed hedgehogs through the winter, they don't bother to go into hibernation, and so it just shows the effect of what global warming can create, and it might be of benefit to bats that they don't have to go into this hibernation phase. So this is the important time for them. If you do get a cold winter, what they need to do now is to feed up as much as possible. Same for hedgehogs and dormice, and put up this huge layer of fat, subcutaneous fat. It's brown and loby just under the skin, and that's what fodders them during the coldest weather. And it's always a bit of a problem when you have mild weather getting towards the end of winter and they wake up. Pips can come out and have a kind of a cleansing flight and go back into hibernation, but it uses energy up all the time, every time you make a movement. There's our first pipistrelle right over the top of us. It's just flicked round and gone back into the gloom. So we haven't quite got... I hope you saw that, if you see what I mean. You're my imaginary guest, and it was so quick. If you're looking elsewhere, you'd have missed it. But that was lovely. Probably about 6 feet above our heads. I'm sitting down, so it was quite low, and that's typical of them, weaving and darting. They're very kind of acrobatic. And of course, bats are fascinating because they produce echolocation and find their prey by sending out signals, signs that we can't hear. I could hear long-eared bats when I was a child, but I've spent too many years too close to loudspeakers and having a combine engine right behind my head and using chainsaws in the early days without ear protection, so my hearing's pretty well shot. But I used to be able to hear bats, and the farmyard was alive with them, and I'd throw stones in the air just before you could see a bat flying towards you, probably pipistrelles, and they'd dive down and try and catch the little stone. My sisters, got 2 sisters at the time, and they'd shriek and head off indoors because my father must have told them the bats, and if they got in your hair, you could never get them out. And they both had long hair. This is way back in the 1950s. Anyway, and he instilled this rhyme in my head, which I can still repeat today. It's bat, bat, fly in my hat, and I'll give you a lump of bacon fat. Where that came from, I have no idea at all. Oh dear. But odd bats just flying about, and the higher ones, I have a feeling, as serotines. We can look up. There's 3 or 4 stars visible now. The light's fading quite quickly, so... oh, there's one nearly touched my head. Crumbs alive. About 3 feet above, so less than 6 feet above ground level, and that was tiny, so it's going to be one of the 3 pipistrelle species. There's common pipistrelle, and then one with a higher tone in its call, called a soprano pipistrelle, and there's another pips as well. They're all pretty well common, but that's the close encounter. So I hope you saw that, and it nearly made me jump. That was about as close as we'll probably get. And by the lake, which is about a quarter of a mile away from where we're sitting on this log, there's a lot of flying insects, and for the last 2 weeks I've had the camera there in the evenings, and I've been trying to film the noctule bats flying in a dead straight line over the top of the water, swooping round at the end, and we'll see if we can get one of those videos. I'll try and choose the best one. They're going so quick. It must be something to do with my age. They're flying at bat speed, which is a proper speed for a bat. And I'll see if I can capture one of the nice videos for the noctules flying over with that large wingspan going right over the surface of the water, looking for perhaps caddisfly or anything about, and they can catch beetles, any reasonable sized prey, including pipistrelles and serotines. They'll eat on the wing as they fly along. If they catch something larger, a moth perhaps, they'll snip the wings off, perch up for a minute or two, and we will be getting near the end of the first feeding session of the night, because it's so still, it's fairly mild, and once they're fed up, so to speak, they'll have a little rest and then have another feeding session. If one particular area's not got too many insects, they'll move off into another hunting territory. So they're quite mobile, rather like birds, but tiny little creatures. Serotine has kind of a dog-like face, similar to the noctule, and little pipistrelles with minute, tiny little teeth, hardly visible. They're flying about, those very dexterous bats you can see around houses and buildings, particularly where there's lots of new housing. Always surprises people when new houses are being put up that bats will often occupy the new buildings rather than the old ones in a particular street. And even buildings that aren't completely finished are sometimes occupied by pipistrelles and serotines, are urban bats. Anyway, that's enough for me for the moment. If there's another evening like this evening, I'll invite you back again to come and sit with me, and we'll finish our little bat. Well, not so much of a survey, more of an observation. And anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this little session. It's really just special, especially for me, to come out into the woodland and just explain from daytime into the night time. Expect the owls will start calling shortly. This is the time of the year they start pairing up, tawnies calling through the woodland at each other. Anyway, it's a beautiful evening. The smells of autumn are just filling all my senses, including that fox. Right, wait for Matthew to come tomorrow morning to carry on our normal countryside podcasts.
It's a wet morning on High Ash Farm, and I'm in the farmyard. It's a steady rain that's coming down, a sort of soaking rain. We've had strong winds over the last few days, but I've come to find Chris Skinner, and lo and behold.
Good morning, Matthew.
Morning,
A
Chris.
very warm but wet welcome to High Ash Farm for our next podcast edition. And we got roughed up a bit here earlier in the week. On last Monday, it was non-stop wind here. Our peak gust, because we're on top of a hill, was 48.5 miles an hour, and it really sort of roughed up the trees and all around the farm.
But the wind hasn't put off the sparrows.
No, they're cheeping away, busy as normal, and yes, there's one just sitting on the gutter, and they're actually having a bath in the gutter, would you believe, making the most of every raindrop. And so I brought you to exactly the spot where we started last week's podcast, and we were looking at the fungus on the bottom of the old oak tree right in the centre of High Ash Farm. And it's been one of those years that's a really good mast year, what we call the production crop of the acorns and the beech mast, and it's really amazingly productive. And so with that wind that we had on Monday, it's brought some of the acorns down here at the farm. And I say some of them because the tree is still absolutely laden with acorns. And
But there's thousands of them down here, isn't there?
yes, it's unusual because oak trees are actually flowering plants like many of the others, but they don't produce the sort of gaudy flowers with the petals on. They don't really need to, but what they do is produce catkins in the spring, and then there's little buds on the tips of the twigs which turn into the acorns once the pollen from the catkins has fertilised them. And this year you get really large acorns after a warm summer, and that's exactly what's happened. So all along the concrete area, the oak tree is pretty much surrounded by hard standing for the horses. We're standing on their grooming yard here, and there are literally thousands of acorns just along the edge there, and there's a gutter here on the other side of the concrete, and it's 2 or 3 inches deep in acorns. Absolutely an amazing sight. I just picked some up down my hands and knees and drop some like that, and that's what's happened to them.
They're beautiful, aren't they?
Yes, a lovely sort of tan colour.
And will animals be coming into the farmyard?
Yes, the jays have gone frantic after this wind. That's a woodland bird that really is responsible for a lot of the native oaks that grow out in open spaces in the countryside, and they sit up in trees, drop the acorns or fly off into areas of open pasture and secrete, or cache we call it, the acorns. And it's a really special bird, particularly at this time of the year. A lot of people don't like them because in the spring they will raid birds' nests, but it's probably one of the most colourful members of the crow family, closely related to magpies, carrion crows, jackdaws, rooks. They're all members of the same family. But jays have this habit of getting hugely excited at this time of the year.
Swallows flying into one of the large barns at High Ash Farm, feeding their young. This is one of the big conservation success stories I know you're very proud of.
Just brings a huge delight. 4 youngsters just waiting for mum and dad.
The podcast aims to bring you sights and sounds like this every week, and we're very thankful of your support. So any donations or subscriptions are very welcome indeed.
All we need is a little bit of extra help. It just keeps it going from week to week.
Monthly or one-off subscriptions, whatever the size. And the website, highashfarm.com/podcast.
6 youngsters right above our head, all with their gates wide open. And they gather acorns, only the good ones, so any that have fallen on the concrete here and got splits in them, they won't touch. Any of the acorns that have a little hole in them, that one's actually started to germinate already, is splitting in half.
Won't get very far on this hard standing.
No, they wouldn't, but with the jays, if they think it's a good acorn, that one's had a grub in it, look, and so they won't pick that up. They'll only take the good acorns, fly off with them. But unusual birds, they've got an especially enlarged esophagus, so they can hold 4 or 5 acorns in their throat, and they don't eat them and digest them. They can hold the last one in their beak, and then they fly off, and they're sort of infected with this urge to cache acorns particularly, and they don't damage them, whereas a squirrel picks an acorn up, it can bite into it and then sort of hoard it somewhere as well for use later on in the winter when pickings are much more sparse. But just look down this gutter, there's a huge sort of avenue of these acorns. And I did get a question many years ago to say, do I know how many acorns an oak tree would produce? And of course that sent Skinner thinking, how can I count this lot? So I enlisted the help of the children of Poyntland Primary School. I was the governor at the time, and we combined nature study and maths, and I bagged up as many of the acorns as I could, and I took them to the school. The poor teachers, but the children absolutely loved it, and the total from this tree behind us, and only a fraction of them are off on the ground, and you can see there's thousands laying here by us.
And this is a tall, mature oak.
It is, yes, it's a pedunculate oak, which I'll explain in a minute, and 76,300 acorns. I have never forgotten.
Whoa!
Exactly. And so nature really produces vast amounts of offspring, with berries on the hawthorn trees. We've talked about it in the past, and of course that oak tree behind us only needs 1 or 2 of these acorns to germinate over its entire life. And a good oak, our oldest oak on the farm, was just over 600 years old. They can live to 800, and so it just shows you how sort of profitable, if you like, if that's the right word, acorn production is, but how many die along the way.
It massively overproduces to play the odds.
Exactly that, yes. But a lot of the oaks here and the avenues on the farm, they were planted by farm workers because we were a seafaring nation. And you can see, if we look over the other side of the meadow, they're all spaced out beautifully. There's a chain between them, so they were about 22 yards apart. And these avenues are all over High Ash Farm. It's an extraordinary site. They would have been planted by the farm workers, perhaps on their way to work. You'd take some acorns in your pocket. And by the way, I'm just going to, because we've got a question later, I'm just going to grab one of these acorns here, and I'll be able to answer the question later on in the podcast. But this is a peduncular oak. There's 2 species of oak that really grow in our country.
If we stand under here, will we be dry, do you think?
No, hardly. There is, you get bigger drips, so that's both of us. So if I get one of the leaves off here, we can have a little look, and perhaps I'll choose one with an acorn on it. There, we'll just snap that off. Some of the, oh goodness, we got showered. Now, peduncular oaks are interesting because the acorn grows on a little stalk called a peduncle, I should say, to get it accurately. And the leaf is quite a broad leaf, and I'll just take it off. And there's 2 little lobes at the bottom. They're like little ears. They have a technical name called auricles. That's what I am, really, but we won't go into that. And so these auricles define this as a peduncular oak. There's another sort of oak which is called a durmast oak or a sessile oak, and the acorns grow directly off the twig. They don't have this little long stem like this particular one. So the 2 oaks, they're easy to identify apart, but they crossbreed as well, so you'll get sort of hybrid oaks. Best place to see sessile oaks is up in the northern part of the UK, on the more acid soils. And
just laughing, we're getting absolutely soaked.
You asked to come under
my
the tree.
theory
Yes.
doesn't work.
No, it doesn't.
Right, we'll
There's
take
an
a few
old
steps.
joke. When is it raining? When it's not raining, and that's under a tree. Exactly. We're getting big drips on us. So yeah, so a lot of history on the oaks, and it's one of our main trees, our long-lived trees. It's a British native. Both the sessile oak and the peduncular oak are both natives because they arrived here before the North Sea and the English Channel filled in with water at the end of the last ice age. So there's about 36 native trees in the UK only, and the rest, any of the others, have arrived after that sealed off period, if you like, and they've been introduced by man. Things like the holm oak, which comes from the Mediterranean. Obviously sweet chestnut are introduced by the Romans as well, so they're both introduced species, and horse chestnut in the 17th century. But I'm being out cheaped this morning. There's a sparrow in my double roof.
Oh, just under there,
Yes,
look.
it's exactly
Yes.
where it's meant to be, and it's cheeping away at us, keeping in the dry, unlike these 2 idiots out here in the pouring rain. So there we are, a little bit of a history on the oak, but I've got a lovely question at the end of this week's podcast about tropisms and oaks. If you ask a scientist to analyse one of these oak acorns that are on the ground all around us, he'll say, well, right, the main constituents, water, is about 20% water in an acorn. There's starch, proteins, carbohydrates and some enzymes, and that's about it. But of course it's nothing like that at all. An acorn contains all the genetic knowledge to produce particular leaves, whether it's a sessile oak or a peduncular oak, how long it's going to live, the shape of the leaves, the acorns, the shape of the bark, and the longevity of the tree. That's all that genetic information is in one little acorn. Just amazing. So there we are, exactly where we started last week's podcast. The fungus is still on the base of the tree. They're chicken of the woods, sulfur polypore.
It's coming out like latex foam, isn't
It does now. It looks quite unusual. But there we are, a lovely start to this week's podcast. And just to show you how you can look after the countryside, because they say you only plant trees for the next generation to enjoy, and I've had a wealth of planting done for me in the 18th, 19th and 20th century all over the farm. So this time last year I gathered some of the acorns here, and I planted this little fellow with 1 acorn, and it's grown. It's now 6 inches tall.
It's in a nice little pot
Yeah,
there.
I popped that in, and I'll pop that out on the farm. And this one is 2 years ago, and it's about 18 inches tall and growing away really nicely. That will also get planted out. But the very best way of getting oak trees to establish out in the countryside, without a doubt, is to grow them from the acorn in the spot where they're going to spend their life. So not near your house with your drains and branches and leaves falling over. The best places for them out in the countryside, in oak woodland, perhaps quite close together to start with, and that makes you get the lovely straight trunks. The sessile oak, particularly, as I mentioned, has straight trunks, and they were the ones that were used in our past for timber. Oak timber was hugely valuable. You could gauge the value of an estate by the number of, not the number of trees or the area of woodland, but the number of pigs it would support way back, and that still happens in the New Forest. So lots and lots of history.
They love acorns.
Absolutely.
And that makes lovely ham and bacon, doesn't it?
Well, I thought your food had come into it somewhere.
What about the oak that you got me to plant maybe a bit less than 10 years ago?
Yes, it's now about 16, 17 feet tall. It's got its own name. It's called the gudgeon oak, would you believe?
Oh dear.
And you are thriving, Gudgeon.
Am I?
Yes.
And that was au natural, wasn't it?
Yes, you just popped it in the top, a huge clump of grass. You popped it in there. The root came out and went down. The shoots come up, and you are looking really healthy in your teenage years.
And this rain will do me a bit of good as well. We've just come half a mile from the farmhouse, and there's not many people about today because of this rain, but it means we might see a bit more, because just on that little journey in the pickup we saw a beautiful native deer, didn't we? And also a young buzzard who's maybe young, but he's absolutely huge on the deck there.
Yes, he's 4 foot wingspan, I should think, for that one. And he's learning his territory, so he's spending all day close to where he was hatched in one of the avenues of oak trees at the farm. Nest was right at the top. I had planned to take you bird nesting this morning, but as it's raining and we'd have been under the trees, I thought I'd spare us that and start with the acorns at the farm here. And we just walk a little bit more. You can see we're in the successional woodland.
Rabbit evidence there.
Yes, lots of wildlife here. And we're just coming into an unusual sight on a farm.
It's the Manhattan of the bee world here.
Yes, it is. This is the High Apiary, and it's run by orchid apiaries, and you can get some of their honey at Surlingham, just close to St Mary's Church. There's an apiary there, and some of the honey from High Ash Farm is on sale there. And at this time of the year, the bees have huge sort of tiers over the brood chamber at the top. So if I explain what we're looking at, there's perhaps 15 hives in this particular spot.
Some of them tall, they're all tower hives, aren't
They are like that, but the brood chambers, the big sort of layer, if you like, the sort of floor at the bottom of the hive, and that's about 12 inches tall, and that will be full of brood, and that's where the queen bee spends her entire life. Then just above that there will be a metal sheet with tiny holes in it, but the holes are just big enough for the workers to come through and not the queen, so she can't go upstairs and lay her eggs in the brood, in the honey combs at the top. Now the beekeeper who's here is really keen. We get on really well together, and he came to see me yesterday lunchtime and said, "Chris, would you like some comb honey?" And my eyes lit up, and he brought me this, and I'm just going to open the little carrier bag like that, and if you just pop your nose in the bag.
Oh yeah, unmistakably beautiful smell of honey.
Yes, and here it is. This is a comb honey.
It's sort of been constructed by the bees on a wooden frame.
Well, the frame is there, but normally there would be what's called a foundation sheet that's put in, that's stamped out from beeswax, exactly the right size for the hexagonal combs, the little cells to be made by bees. So what we got there in the hives in front of us, and they're working. If we walk on a little bit more, you can actually see them coming in out of the hive. These are the forager bees. Hopefully we're not in the too close and so we don't get peppered. There they are, going in and out. Even though it's raining, some of the hives are quite busy.
The entrance is near the bottom. It's
Yes.
a little slit about 3 or 4 inches across.
Yep, that's it exactly. And there's perhaps half a dozen bees going in and out. Oh, no, the next one is now suddenly woken up there, and there's lots coming along. It's raining. There's still nectar for them to gather, particularly from our last main nectar and pollen flow of the season, what we talked about last week, and that's the ivy. So those are forager bees, and they're bringing in pollen and nectar and another product as well that they get from the buds of oak trees and poplar, balsam poplars particularly one, and it's an unusual product. It's got a lovely name. It's called propolis. And propolis comes from the Greek pro, meaning in front, and opolis, as in metropolis, if you like, city. So it means in front of the city. And bees make the size of the hole, the entrance hole. If it's too big, like in a woodpecker's hole, if the wild colony's in there, they'll cement it up with this product on the top. And it looks a bit like beeswax, but it isn't, and it's got the most amazing, I'll just scrape a bit off, the amazing aroma. Just put your nose in that one. It's different to the honey. Can you smell it?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really powerful.
Yeah, well, strong. Yeah.
It's strong, and it's absolutely lovely. It's a kind of sweet, sticky, and it's kind of called bee dross in the because the bees stick their combs together with it, with propolis. And so that's the first product. The next product in there, the main one for the bees, the queen will be laying her eggs in clean cells. She won't lay her egg in a cell that's been used before and hasn't been cleaned out. So when a young bee hatches, it's gone through its 4 stages: egg, larvae, sort of chrysalis when it's sealed over, and then it emerges as a young adult. And its first job, and bees sort of share out their lives with different duties through their life. And the first duty for a young bee, once it's come out of the cell, is called household duties. And I just had a bee buzz around my ear then.
Yes,
I think
you've got one behind you there.
have I?
Yeah, shall
I'm
we
just going to move. Oh, I know why. I'm holding a honeycomb that hasn't been sealed over. Perhaps not a good idea. near the hive, those little freshly emerged bees, household duties, and they'll be cleaning out cells. And after about 4 or 5 days, they have glands on the side of their abdomen which start to produce wax. So they can start to build up these lovely cells here.
And all these cells, they're that perfect shape, aren't
Exactly.
they? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
6.
6.
There's 6. They're hexagonal cells. Now, there's a lot more to these cells than meets the eye. So these young bees produce these lovely cells, but when you hold the comb up, they're not horizontal. They're sloping upwards. So the nectar that's brought in by those forager bees doesn't run out. They're actually sloping up at quite a degree. So can you see?
Yes.
If you look down, you can actually look down into them.
So that the beautiful golden amber honey stays in there.
Right. So that's not honey. That's nectar with water in it. Nothing to do with the rain that's pouring down on
Looks
top
the
of
same colour as the honey, doesn't it?
It certainly does. So those forager bees will pass over the nectar to these bees on their household duty, and they will manipulate that in their mouths, mix it with saliva and various enzymes, and then a chemical reaction starts to happen. The sort of household bees then dump that in these cells, but that's not the end of the story, because there's a lot of water still in there. So at night, when the bees aren't flying, particularly on warm nights, if you come near one of these hives and listen, you'll hear a humming sound, and the bees are fanning the excess moisture out of that nectar. You can't make this up, can you? And when it gets to the right specific gravity, I'm just going to turn this comb round the other way. it gets sealed over with more wax from the abdomen of those. So about 2/3 of this side of the comb.
This very white-looking wax that's
Yes.
sealed over the cells.
And that's perfectly preserved honey, which they can use in the winter months to sustain a colony. Remember, they can't really forage during the winter, so the queen bee will stay alive. Some of the bees that are reared at this late stage of the year will survive through the winter as well. But once you go into winter, then the colony is at its lowest numbers.
Oh, we're back in the farm truck now, and some idiot, Chris.
Left his window open.
Yeah, and
It's on the passenger side, folks.
I'm now sitting in a puddle. Oh dear, so we're drying off. Oh, Chris, it looks like you've had a bath.
Yes, look at that. It's called not a good hairdo day. No. Well,
Rat's had a little shake, haven't you?
yes,
Oh,
we've
look
been
at him.
sprayed with water. It couldn't get any worse, could it? But it's a pound a drop still, so I'm glad we're...
Yeah, you're happy it's happening.
Yes, yeah, very good news.
Bonnie, hello, and thank you for your email all the way from Northern Illinois in the US. I'm continuing to enjoy listening to the podcast. I'm sorry I'm late asking about the topic of plant tropism. I had hip replacement surgery, and you've been with me from hospital to rehab to home recovery. You talked about it over the summer, and I realised I was enjoying watching this process, but not realising it had a name. I'm including 2 photographs. Number 1, I thought one of my favourite ferns had been killed when a slice of oak tree trunk was placed over it as a landscaping addition to our hosta and fern garden. This spring, it magically popped up through what must be a thin crack in the log slice. I've been delighted to see more and more fronds popping up. And the second photo, a small cut-leaf sumac tree has runners just underground and has put up a new sapling which came right up through this large blackened mushroom that grew up where a dead oak tree had been cut down. What survivors these plants are! Could you please revisit the topic of plant tropism and explain more?
Matthew, it's a real pleasure with questions like that. That's right up my street. For a particular reason, I haven't had to do any research at all on tropisms.
Here are the photos.
Here they are.
From
Look
Bonnie.
at that. Yes. And it's a tree trunk slice with the fern coming through one of the minuscule cracks, and it looks really healthy, and it was obviously covered. It's a good 2-foot diameter piece of tree trunk, and then the other tree as well has come up through a very large toadstool, and that's part of tropisms, what they are. Well, basically, if I explain what a tropism is and how I know about them, a tropism is just a response to a living plant, particularly plants, trees as well, obviously, to a stimuli. And there's at least 20 tropisms that I know of. Now, the reason I know about them is because I got very distracted in a biology lesson at school, and it was being taken by the headmaster of the school, no less, Mr. Wynne, who was very keen on nature study. And he said, "Skinner, would you like to come back into the classroom?" And I said, "I am in the classroom." "No," he said, "your mind is elsewhere. So Monday morning, would you like to tell the class about tropisms?" Oh dear. So I spent the weekend and I read up about them, and the more I read, the more fascinated I got. We were called by our surnames at school, so he wasn't being rude at the time. Anyway, the first one I came across was hydrotropism, which is a response to a plant to water. Hydra is the Latin or the scientific name for water, and it means the plant roots will go and seek water going downwards. Now, when we looked at the acorns on the oak tree earlier, I put one in my pocket, and here it is. Now, if I've stood it upright, so its base is at the bottom. If I imaginally cut it in half, the bottom half of the acorn has got something called positive geotropism. That means the roots go towards gravity. positive and going downwards, and the shoot goes away from gravity, the top. So the shoot is negative geotropism. So that's a response of a seedling, if you like. As soon as this germinates, the root will go down, the shoot will go up. So that's our first proper tropism, if you like. Now there's lots of others. There's one which sweet peas have on their tendrils, and the Latin for touch is called thigma. So it's called a thigmatropism, and sweet pea tendrils, if they touch anything, they will wrap themselves round almost by magic.
Like vines.
Yes, exactly like that, yes. And so that's a thigmatropism. And then there's another one which, if a plant root down in the soil touches a stone, it obviously can't go through the stone, so it moves around it, and that's a thigmatropism down in the soil, in the pitch black. And so the tropisms go on and on. There's another one called chemotropism, which is a response to the plant seeking out chemicals in the soil. Chemo, scientific name for chemicals, if you like. So that's that beauty of that acorn. It's already embodied with these tropism inside the seed, nothing to do with all the protein, the starch, the water that we talked about. It's part of the natural world, part of the response of a plant to various stimuli. And I won't go on through the 20-odd tropisms I had to learn, but I got it all out to the class, and they were actually quite impressed. So the headmaster invited me to take his place to run the rest of the class, and I declined. I said, no, I've learned so much, but it is, which I did do, and it stayed with me to this day because I had to learn it, and somehow or other it went into this thick head of mine, and it's fascinated me ever since. So a brilliant question from Bonnie. Thank you very much indeed. It's allowed me to expand a little bit more about tropisms.
I think it's time we headed somewhere to dry off.
I think so. We've steamed up the windows in here now.
Rat's been shaking away to
Yes,
try and
he
get
has.
rid of the water.
The whole dashboard is covered in dog spray now. It's dear, oh dear.
Including us as well. If you've got a question or a comment, something you'd like to say to Chris, then email chris@highashfarm.com. And if you can help with the running costs of this podcast, there is a possible way of making a donation, and that is by logging on to highashfarm.com/podcast. And there's always the Facebook site as well, with all sorts of images and videos and wonderful little bits of news that's constantly updated all through the week.
Yes, there's a cracking video at the moment of the sunflowers that we visited a couple of weeks ago in full bloom, and the video is a little drone footage, and it takes off through one of the farm tracks and goes over the field, and you can actually see the sunflower walk. They're a little bit past their best this morning, rather like you and I, but they're looking a bit bedraggled, but it's all part of how quickly the seasons move on, and we're striding in to autumn at a great rate of knots already. So looking forward to next week already, and once again we'll visit some of the marvels of nature here at High Ash Farm, Caister, St Edmund.